President Trump bankrupted Iran in his first term. Joe Biden took office, went back to the failed policies of trusting Iran. That's when they started making money again. Did they build factories and farms? No. They farmed out money to the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And the result was 1,200 Jewish people were massacred on October the 7th.
The landscape in the Middle East is changing at a really fast pace. And what happens here, because I'm in Jerusalem today, actually impacts us all over the West, and particularly in the United States. Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States, leading the charge to keep America on the right track and on the right side of history. The U.S. government's role in the Middle East is critical to all of us all over the world. Join me this summer at CUFI's annual summit in Washington, D.C., June 29th through July 1st. I was there last year. It's fantastic. Thousands of people get together where we learn from leading policymakers and Middle East experts. You can be heard on Capitol Hill. Make sure you register now at CUFI.org. That's CUFI.org. And to all our listeners, we have our own promo code, so make sure to use it. Standpoint25, Standpoint25. Make sure to register now. See you there. So I'm here in Jerusalem, Israel, the capital of the state of Israel. I'm here actually with my family for the holiday of Passover. And lucky me that this past week, finally, after much delay, Mike Huckabee, Governor Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, was finally sworn in as ambassador to Israel, United States ambassador to Israel, and he just landed here a couple days ago. I reached out, and his amazing team was so accommodating, and we're sitting here in the studio with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Gabe, it's great to be here. It is great to be here. When you used the word finally, I thought, boy, people have no idea what a grueling ordeal it is to go through the confirmation process. But now it is complete. I have been sworn in. I've made it to Israel, my wife, 2 dogs. We've moved here, and we could not possibly have more excitement about being here and doing what we're setting out to do.
It's incredible. So having a weekly political podcast, it's interesting because you get to see, you're zooming in every week at what's happening. And a few months ago, we had, I think this was with Senator Rick Scott, where he was just going off on the fact that the confirmation processes were taking so long when they knew they didn't even have the vote. So it was really just delay for the sake of delay. We don't have to get into that because we're here. It's actually Easter Sunday, which is such a special day for the Christian community. And this morning, we're filming. It's 10:30 in the morning here in Jerusalem. Already this morning, you posted that you were up at a sunrise event in Jerusalem. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was incredible. As many times as I've been to Israel, I've never been here on Easter Sunday to be at a sunrise service at the Garden Tomb. And for Christians, that's the epicenter. So I just found out about it yesterday. And we had attended a church that meets on Shabbat, because a lot of the Christian churches meet same time that Shabbat is going on. It makes more sense. And a person there said, "Are you going to the sunrise service at the Garden Tomb?" I said, "Didn't know there was one." So my wife, who normally does not get up early, and I hope she doesn't see this, she's not an early riser. I am. And she said, "Oh, we should go to that." And I thought, I want to see if she'll get up that early. So sure enough, we did. We got there about 6:15. It was 6:30 service. It was wonderful. Just a delightful experience. And to be in Jerusalem on Easter Sunday for a Christian, it just is a wonderful way. And these first 3 days that we have been here have been remarkable, just to experience Jerusalem, not as tourists, but as residents. And it's been incredible.
So many people don't know the connection that you and your family have with Israel. You've been coming here since the early 70s.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, separate from your time in public service, lieutenant governor, governor, and your time on television, which is always interesting to interview someone who has their own TV show. So I hope we're doing okay here at Standpoint.
So far, so good.
Great.
So good.
Tell me what it means to you personally at this point in your career, after having done so much politically, but also on the side in parallel, always so much with your church in Israel, with your family, to be here as a U.S. ambassador to Israel.
Well, it's really kind of like the culmination of a whole lifetime of preparation. This is not a job I asked for. I never sat down with the president and said, "Hey, I want you to make me ambassador to Israel." We never had that conversation. Other people had apparently put it in his ear, and he maybe thought of it. I don't know. But I was totally taken aback when the call came just a few days after the election. I was the first person that he contacted about being an ambassador to anywhere, which shows two things. One, that it probably really was a God thing that he asked me. Number two, it shows how important Israel is to the president, that the first person, the first country that he connected for an ambassadorship was Israel. So the people of Israel, I think, should clearly understand this president is not just talking, he is walking his commitment to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel. And that was just one more way of affirming it. But to the bigger part of your question, my first trip here was in July of 1973. I was 17. It was a month before my 18th birthday. Just finished high school, came over here with a friend whose family was very wealthy. I was very, very poor. I couldn't have taken a trip 40 miles from my house. But my friend, who became my college roommate that fall, wanted to take a senior trip. And his dad said, I'm not going to let you go over there by yourself. But if you take Mike Huckabee with you, I'll pay his way.
You clearly had a good reputation even then.
I guess so. His dad must not have known me that well. No, honestly, I think he felt I was going to be responsible. I would keep his son out of trouble. So we came over here and we went all over the Middle East. We went to Lebanon, we went to Syria, we went to Jordan, we went to Turkey, we went to Greece and Cyprus and the Isle of Patmos. We went all over. Included on that itinerary was Israel. And I saw some beautiful things all over the Middle East. This was a time when, for example, Beirut, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, absolutely incredible place. Since then, it's been ruined by the radical Muslims, and they've destroyed the antiquities and the architecture and just made a mess of it. But it was drop-dead gorgeous in that time. Israel, quite frankly, wasn't that beautiful in 1973. You know, they've been through wars in 48 and 56 and 67 and are about to go into one in 73, although we didn't know that at the time. But it was a sleepy little country with a struggling economy and people that were making aliyah, but most of them had to live in kibbutzim in order to survive. Very different country. But it wasn't the visual. There was something very powerful about being here. And I've described it this way. It was the only place I've ever been where I felt at home in a place I'd never been before. And it just felt right. And so that started my deep, abiding love for the land of Israel and for the Jewish people. And it's only gotten stronger after 52 years.
It's incredible, by the way, that feeling of being home here in Israel is something that's universal. It's impossible to explain, and it's in slogans. It's on the Al airline carrier. That's their slogan. You're most at home in the world. You feel the most at home in the world here, but it's true. And you speak to, I've like you, led many trips to Israel over the years of people. It's their first time, by the way, Jews and non-Jews alike. And as long as they're connected to God, they're connected to the Bible, they're connected to religion at all. They come here and they feel at home when they're here. It's something in the air. It's inexplicable. And anyone who doubts it that's listening, just come and then you tell me. But look, you jumped on a moving train, and the train, you're here in a very consequential time, in a very critical time for the Middle East, a critical time for Israel, critical time for the West as well. We obviously have Iran, Gaza, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and a few more fronts that Israel is fighting, but so is the U.S. And the U.S. has really mobilized their troops, especially since Trump has taken office and become active with the Houthis in Yemen. How do you see, first, broadly speaking, the U.S.'s role now during this chapter of history to try to bring things, whether to a close, to end the wars, to help strengthen Israel? What's the U.S.'s role today?
Well, I know the president would love to see the conflicts come to an end. He's a president, really, that has focused on peace. I don't think he gets credit for it, but if you go back when he was in his first term, we didn't have a world of turmoil. There was no October 7th. There was no incursion by the Russians into Ukraine. There was not the kind of saber rattling of the Chinese on the Taiwan Strait. The whole world was very much more at peace than it is now. And part of it was because when President Trump was in office, people were afraid of what he would do if they created this kind of mayhem. So he comes back into it with a 4-year absence, and the world now is on fire. And, you know, he has to show up with the fire truck and start trying to put it out. I do believe that one perspective that people have to just keep focused is that whatever happens to Israel is a precursor to what is ultimately going to happen to the U.S. if we don't stop it here. My favorite way of saying it is Israel is the appetizer, but the U.S. is the entree. Let's look at the Iranians. For 46 years, they've been saying, death to Israel, death to the U.S. And they mean it. They've also made it very clear that Israel is, as they call it, the little Satan, and America is the great Satan. So when Americans act like, it's happening to Israel, it's their own thing, it doesn't matter to us, it does matter to us. It matters to us in a very significant way. Not just because there's 200,000 Americans living in Israel, not just because of the strong alliance that our countries have, but also because we are the warm-up, or Israel is the warm-up, for what they want to do, what they have vowed to do to the United States if they had the opportunity. We can't give them the opportunity.
It's interesting. There's so many things to unpack there, but focusing on our side of the political, and I know now you're a diplomat now, but you are who you are. And on the right side, at least in the chatter boxes, right, in the podcasts of the world, the alternative medias of the world, some of whom have much larger reach than even traditional media, so we can't ignore them. They seem to be unable to see that, to make that connection between just the national security interest of the United States, how protecting Israel, or not even protecting Israel, because Israel could protect themselves, supporting Israel and protecting themselves serves the national security interests of the Middle East. I think it's something we can't lose focus on. But just, you're talking about Iran. So this is one of, I think, the main topics I think I'd love to explore with you is Iran today. Everyone knows Iran. Everyone who listens to my show at least knows Iran is the puppet master behind almost all the chaos that we see around the Middle East. They've threatened directly the United States. They've tried to kill the president of the United States, Mike Pompeo before that, and many people before that. So it's clear that they're an enemy of the West entirely, including the United States. You talk about how President Trump, and I agree with this tremendously, lives under the peace through strength philosophy. There's been a lot of chatter this last week about Israel attempting to attack Iran and the U.S. stopping them, whether that was under Biden or Trump. It's unclear. I'm not a big fan of leaks because they're always just sort of little glimpses. Maybe they're partially true. So let's ignore what the leaks were about. What's the U.S.'s strategy today with regards to Iran? It seems like the president is a little reluctant to go military and is trying really hard to do something diplomatically.
I think the president would love to see some diplomatic resolve. But let's be very clear. He has been unequivocal in saying that Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon. They're just not. So it's not like, well, they might have a few, they might have one or... He's made it very clear they're not going to have any. And so no matter what discussion you hear, that's been the official perspective, policy, and that didn't come from some leak out of the White House or wherever that got to the New York Times. That comes directly from the president's own mouth. So I'm going to take that as authoritative. Secondly, I'd point out that the New York Times is wrong about most everything. So, when somebody says, oh, you look what the New York Times said, my thing would be, so what they said probably is not true. They said 51 intelligence officers thought that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. They thought President Trump was involved in Russia collusion. They thought a lot of things that have been completely 100% wrong. So the fact that they're the source is problematic. And the other thing I learned through years of political work in my own life is this. People who know don't talk, and people who talk don't know. When you hear somebody who acts like he or she is the source and they've got really inside information, I discount it almost to a 90+% level for the simple reason that a person who really is in a circle of genuine trust, they got there because they didn't run their mouth. They got there because they could keep a confidence. Somebody who runs his or her mouth is a person who cannot be trusted, never has been trusted, and as a result of that will never be trusted. That's why I say, those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. When somebody tells something that shouldn't be telling it, chances are what they said is not accurate.
So I agree with that statement entirely, and I know many people like that say leaks of things that I know what actually happened, and I see them talking. It's an ego thing almost. But the last several presidents have said Iran isn't going to get a nuclear weapon. We saw Obama shepherd in the JCPOA, which was one of the worst deals in history. I'm like, you could put it up next to Oslo maybe as far as bad deals that are made in the Middle East. But there's a lot of nuance beyond the headlines of saying they can't get a nuclear weapon. And in fact, this week in Israel, when I was speaking to so many friends here in the political arena, commentators, elected officials, etc., seems to be a concern of Trump likes to move fast. The president likes to move fast. And he even said that the conversations are moving fast. My phone is blowing up from friends in the United States. What's going to happen is if I know, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but you might be closer to knowing what's going to happen. But there's a fear of a JCPOA 2.0, where they'll still be allowed to enrich uranium. They'll still be able to have some sort of nuclear program where there'll be a watchdog. And we all know the Iranians, history repeats itself, and they're not going to comply with any sort of deal like that. From my perspective, zero tolerance is the only way out. Do you have anything you can share about where the directions the talks are going?
I have to be careful in what I say, not to do what I just talked about, saying something that. But what I can say, and I can say it on the record because it's pretty evident from what we see, President Trump pretty much bankrupted Iran in his first term. He put the maximum pressure and economic sanctions that made them hurt them badly. They didn't have any money. And I've often said the brilliance of Donald Trump as president was that instead of bombing them, he bankrupted them. And in bankrupting them, he took away their capacity to do nefarious things. He's already started putting those sanctions back in place and putting that maximum pressure on. It was the relaxation of that pressure when Joe Biden took office and immediately on his first day went back to the failed policies of trusting Iran. That's when they started making money again, and they quickly had $70-80 million. What did they do with it? Did they build factories and farms? No. Nor did they build schools or infrastructure for their people. They farmed out money to the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And the result was 1,200 Jewish people, civilians, were massacred on October the 7th. It's a direct result of Hamas having money that they got because their puppeteer, the Iranians, gave it to them. And they got it because Joe Biden and the administration trusted Iran would do good things with the money they got, and they would somehow be good actors. So what I would like to say is that Donald Trump has never acted in a way that showed that he trusted the Iranians to make a deal, and if they made one, didn't trust him to keep it. By his rejecting JCPOA, that was a great example of a president who looked at that deal and said, it's a bad deal. Because you assume that the other party is an honest broker and they're going to keep their word. With the Iranians, their word is dirt. So why would you believe them? They may make a deal, they may present one, but do you believe that they will keep it? That's the real question.
Yeah, and I think that the answer is self-evident. As a diplomat, there's something I was thinking about asking you about. There's a big back and forth in the last few weeks about whether or not the U.S. is negotiating directly with Iran. And lots of people on the right, on the left, everyone likes to get upset about everything. From my perspective, personally only, you can only negotiate with your enemies. To negotiate with your friends is not a negotiation, it's a conversation. And even if they're terrorists, this whole idea of going through these proxies, it's like a game of broken telephone, which from my perspective also I think is a little bit fake, a little bit of theater, because there's always discussions happening. What's your position on having direct discussions with the United States, having direct discussions with Iran on this specific issue?
Well, again, I'm going to trust the president's intuition because he has an incredible understanding of what will work. That's what makes him successful. I think part of what he wants to make sure of is that he's exhausted every possible remedy. It's the same way. If Hamas would surrender, they could maybe disappear somewhere. They're never going to run Gaza again, and the president has made that very clear. So you look at what people do in response to what's presented to them. I think the president is going to look at what the Iranians say they're going to do and then see if they even attempt to do it. Most of us have very little confidence that anything they agree to will ever be lived up to.
You talked about the world being on fire, lots of things going on. When you talk about the world being on fire, I immediately think of Qatar. When we talk about funding, I immediately think of Qatar or Qatar. Both pronunciations are correct for all the internet trolls. Qatar, from my perspective, is both the arsonist and the firefighter, right? They're the ones who fund a lot of the terrorism in the Middle East, and they're also the great mediators where everybody, even within the administration, people come out and praise Qatar for the work they're doing in the mediations, etc. And in private conversations that I've had with many members of Congress, they'll always very quickly say, well, you don't know how helpful Qatar is. We asked them to host these discussions, and they hosted the Taliban, and that's where we met with them, and that's why we have 12,000 U.S. troops there, and it's complicated. But from where I sit, it shouldn't be so complicated, right? You're either, like George W. Bush said, you're either with us or you're against us. And the idea of having these countries, Turkey's another one, that play both sides is very complicated for me. What's your position? How does the United States today look at Qatar in the mix of all the craziness happening in the Middle East?
I think both eyes open. What you said, I think, is pretty accurate. It's complicated. We clearly have an incredibly important asset in the military base there. There are times and ways in which they have been helpful. So you accept that, you respect it, and you appreciate it. But then there are times when they haven't put the pressure that they could have and should have on Hamas to let the hostages go. When Hamas leaders were living large in Doha in the finest hotels and living in luxury, while the people of Gaza were being, subjected to every kind of deprivation. That's not the total package that they need to present. So I would say that your assessment is spot on. It's complicated, and it is not pure. There aren't a lot of clean hands when it comes to dealing with the issues of the Middle East, and I think you all have to recognize that. But what I see in President Trump is a president that he has clarity about what he believes should be the U.S. interest. And the first thing is get the remaining American hostages out of Gaza. Big picture, what can and must be done to protect Israel, its security, its sovereignty, so that the Jewish state and the Jewish people know that their homeland is not going to be carried off, carved out, and made vulnerable by people who hate them and want to destroy them. And I don't think a lot of Americans fully understand, Gabe, that the pressure against Israel is not a pressure for them to give up a little sliver of land. What it is there is a push toward not a two-state, but a one-state solution. And Israel would not be a part of that one state, because that's always been the stated intent of those who are pushing for, quote, a two-state solution. What they really push for is that there would be an annihilation of Israel. And if people say, oh, that's not true, here's what I do. I say, let me walk with you into the old city. We're going to go into a Palestinian-owned shop. I'm going to pick up a tourist map, and I'm going to open it up and ask you, find Israel on this map. And guess what? They won't find it, because it isn't there, because they already have said there is no Israel. So when you have that mindset toward the state of Israel, it's really hard to envision a campfire in which everyone is sitting around roasting marshmallows and singing Kumbaya.
I'll tell you, you've only been here 3 days, but I want you to look for something that I've noticed in the last 2 weeks. I always look for these little details to try to inform my opinion on things. Since October 7th, there's been a big rush. All jewelry makers in the U.S. have been making tons of money because they sell. All the Jews now like to wear a map of the state of Israel, or some sort of Jewish star or something. But let me focus on the map of the state of Israel, which you'll see everywhere now. Before October 7th, some people had them on as a pendant, but it wasn't really a big thing. Now, a large percentage of Jews all over the world wear it, and here in Israel as well. We're in Israel today. So I noticed something that I've seen lots of Palestinian Arabs wearing a map of Israel around their neck. And for those who are uninformed, they might think, oh, wow, look, they're supporting the state of Israel. But no, it's in fact the opposite. It's what you're saying. It's the same that they're showing on their T-shirts with the watermelons in Times Square or in Columbia University or Harvard. But here also in Israel, you're seeing the Arabs also doing the same thing. Of course, not all of them. We're not painting with a wide brush, but you can still learn from that and see what they're doing. Listen, I want to be respectful of your time. I have one last topic to ask you about.
All right.
The last in 45, the last administration, Trump with Ambassador Friedman that was here. One of the greatest accomplishments, as you know, and probably everybody knows, was the Abraham Accords. And finally, it was a change in even the approach that the U.S. took to peace in the Middle East. Everyone said peace has to go through the Palestinians, sort of a narrative I think that the Palestinians put together. But it turns out we can go around them and we can make a broader peace. I somehow thank Obama for that, because I think he strengthened Iran so much that it required some of the nations in the Middle East and the Gulf states in particular to come even closer to Israel. Tell me a little bit about what you'd like to accomplish in the next 4 years, or as long as you're here, with regards to the Abraham Accords, expanding them, what you're looking to do with that.
I would love to see a wonderful expansion of the Abraham Accords, and I think President Trump is just the one to make that happen. Everyone who became part of the Abraham Accords benefited from it. There were no losers, only winners. And that's not just Israel, but that was Bahrain, that was the UAE, Morocco. Everybody that signed up, they've got trade, they have joint tourism, they have shared technology. The economic benefits are terrific, but the security benefits are even more dramatic. So you look at that and you know that other countries would like to be able to join. Some of them are concerned with their population resist it and rebel against it, and they've got to work through that, and I understand it and respect it. But one of the brilliant parts of the Abraham Accords was that nobody waited on the Palestinians to come around and say, yeah, we're okay with that. Because if you look at history, they've never been okay with anything. If they agree to something, they don't keep it. And most of the time when they're offered, as they were back in, 2005, basically 95% of everything they ever said they wanted, almost close to 100%. And all laid on the table. Here, you have it all. Go back to the pre-67 line. I mean, everything. Things that were, frankly, irrational and insane to offer. But they were offered, and Yasser Arafat walked away from it and said, nah. Because what did he want? He didn't want a piece of the land. He was probably, at least metaphorically, the author of this catchphrase, from the river to the sea. And a lot of people, the useful idiots in America who say that and scream it on college campus, they have no idea what they're talking about. That literally means Israel is wiped away. Because the river to the sea means from the Jordan to the Mediterranean and everything in between, and that means there is no Israel. That is a horrific statement for someone to shout, because what they're shouting is for death to the Jewish people, death to the Jewish state, death to a future for a very small part of the world population, 0.6%. And that should always be unacceptable, not just to Americans, but to anybody on the planet who believes that human dignity and human rights are fundamental regardless of who's asking for it.
Ambassador Mike Huckabee, I want to tell you on a personal note, I started this podcast 1.5 years ago. And the reason I started it is because I feel like I always have interesting conversations beyond the headlines with people that I get to interact with for many reasons. And I feel like that's missing in public discourse. And I said, what an incredible opportunity if we do a weekly podcast where we get to speak to some of these people, most of which are my friends. We're on, I think you're episode 80. And most of our guests have been people that I have personal relationships with. And this is really a dream come true. It's exactly why I started this podcast, be able to have a discussion with you on your first few days here in Israel as the new ambassador for the United States in such a critical time. It's an honor. It's always an honor to be with you and your family. Your wonderful daughter, Sarah, was on the show a few weeks ago in our studio in Miami. And I wish you nothing but the best. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Gabe. And thank you for years of friendship that I hope will continue and get even stronger.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Make sure to watch, follow, subscribe, share, all those things you do to support podcasts like ours, and we'll see you next time.